All right, all right. I hope everything is working on your end because it looks pretty nice on mine. And I am really, really glad to have you all here. It's an exciting webinar. It's Halloween themed. We are going to be talking about the horror stories of implementing sustainability. We'll be talking about those situations when we have good intentions, we want to do the right thing, and then reality kicks in, and those good intentions pave the road to hell. So, on today's webinar, we'll have two speakers who work with many companies in their day-to-day basis. Chloe Skye Weiser, and she's going to have a presentation about ESG comms that drive us Batty. And I'm really looking forward to this. And we'll also have Juozas Baranauskas presenting about packaging sustainability, greenwashing fundamentals for dummies. That's another exciting presentation coming up because Juozas is someone who works with these topics in his day-to-day professional agenda. These topics is something that he deals with on day-to-day basis, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about what he's going to share as well. Before we get into it, just really quickly, I'm going to introduce myself and Impact House, because I know that many of you who are joining us today probably have heard about this for the first time. So my name is Kristine. I'm the founder of your Impact House, and my day-to-day mission is to help companies become more sustainable and get started on their journey and create positive impact with the work that they do. And I worked as a consultant for the last 2-ish years. And prior to that, I developed and launched a CSR strategy for a global unicorn company called Printful. And also worked quite a bit in the startup scene with accelerator program Startup Wise Guys and nonprofit startup conference TechChill and a few other organizations. And it's been a ride. Now we are here. One more thing I quickly wanted to share while we are here is a new project that I started this year. It's an online program for sustainability managers, for sustainability leaders that need to figure out how to put together an ESG strategy and lead their team through the process. So this online program brings together experts from all across Europe, and these experts, consultants, sustainability managers, they are giving the participants the know-how of how to actually go through that process. Currently, this is how the first program looks like. We are just getting started. It's really interesting. I'm learning a ton as well. And the good thing is that we are going to be putting together one more program. After this one ends, which is going to be end of November, we will gather the feedback, compile all the learnings we've had from this program, and offer you even better one. So if you're interested in learning about this topic, if this is on your agenda, if you need to figure it out, let me know. Contact me through LinkedIn or email, whatever. Let's talk. Okay. This was the introduction. See, it was short, mostly sweet. And now we'll get started with the first presentation. The first presentation will be from Chloe Skye Weiser, and she's going to talk about ESG comms that drive us Batty.
Hello. I am so happy to be here and talking to you today. As Christina nicely introed me, I'm going to be talking about ESG comms that drive us Batty. I am a copywriter with nearly 10 years of experience that has recently moved into the sustainability and ESG space. And specifically, I want to talk about the way that our enthusiasm to communicate about our initiatives for what we're doing for the environment can sometimes get a little entangled, but also how the changing regulatory landscape in the EU and abroad is going to affect the way that we communicate about sustainability in the coming years. So let's jump into it. This presentation has 4 parts. First, I'm going to quickly intro what ESG is, because I know that can be a confusing term for a lot of people, as well as the current atmosphere and environment for that. We're going to talk about 3 real-world examples, horror stories in action about ESG communications. Then we're going to talk about the greenwashing terms that we should put to rest. And then, of course, how to bring your ESG comms back from the dead in 2024 and beyond. So again, what is sustainability versus ESG? I want to just talk about this briefly so that we have our terms defined. So sustainability is much more broad than ESG. It's more of a philosophy. The UN has defined this as how we can meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. But ESG is something a lot more specific. It is a framework with 3 pillars: environmental, social, and governance. And it's how businesses are expressing their commitments to different things, and specifically how they report about, for example, their environmental and social efforts. And of course, today we're focusing a lot more on the E of that. So ESG has everything to do with sustainability, but it is a much more focused version of that. So what's ESG? As mentioned, environmental, social, and governance. These are the 3 main topic areas for which companies are expected to report their day-to-day non-financial risks and opportunities. Because, for example, as we know, the environment has a lot to do with how we do business. It can affect supply chains, and companies can, of course, affect the environment, influencing climate change, biodiversity, and a lot more other things. The main thing to keep in mind is that the common goals of sustainability and ESG are to move us towards a society that thinks long term, which is, of course, why we would formulate environmental initiatives as well as report on our ESG goals, KPIs, and progress. So, what are the stakes? In 2020, the EU Commission did a study, and they found that 53.3%, more than half, of examined environmental claims in the EU were vague, misleading, or unfounded, and 40% were unsubstantiated, meaning that essentially when you pick a product, maybe it says eco-friendly, natural, you can't necessarily trust that it does what it says, or it is unclear exactly how that helps the environment. Another thing is that 78% of people are more likely to purchase a product that's labeled eco-friendly. I don't know about you. I know about all these things. I can see through them. I'm in marketing. I do ESG communication specifically. And if I see a product labeled eco-friendly in the store, I'd be more interested in that, gravitate towards that. Maybe you can relate to that as well. And finally, more than half of consumers are willing to spend extra money for eco-friendly products. And by that, I mean products that are specifically labeled eco-friendly, but also products that are making various ESG claims, which could be social responsibility, responsible sourcing, things like this. And of course, as we can see here, making ESG claims on your products and services has an economic benefit for businesses. But the real question is, does it have an environmental benefit? Let's find out. So the landscape as of right now. Actually, this is a very hot topic at the moment, the EU Green Claims Directive, also called by many people the sort of anti-greenwashing law, the EU's ban on greenwashing. And this is being debated in the Commission at the moment, expected to be finalized very soon. The goal of the Green Claims Directive is to basically lay out a set of criteria that make it harder for companies and organizations to make any kind of claims that they want. It also has some extra information having to do with how we talk about product durability, as well as other things. But it will also specifically ban claims that cannot be backed up with proof. And the goal is to protect consumers from misleading practices and to help us all make better purchasing choices. We also have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, also known by its acronym CSRD. And this is a regulation that is requiring large companies, more than 500 employees, as well as all publicly listed companies, that includes small and medium enterprises, to start reporting on their ESG initiatives from 2024. It means the first report will come out in 2025 about goals measured in 2024. And even if you're not inside the EU, this might affect your business because any business that headquartered anywhere in the world that has branches or operates in the EU will also be affected by this. Finally, this is something which is affecting the EU as well as the US, where I'm from. Forgot to mention I'm from New York. That ESG reports will eventually be required to be third-party audited and verified. And what that means is that as of now, ESG reports were very ambitious. So people were saying, I want to get ahead of the game. Let's talk about what we're doing to help the environment, social responsibility, what we're doing to make our operations more transparent to our consumers. But these were not necessarily verified or independently verified, rather. But this will be required by the CSRD as well as the US Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as the state of California. So this means that things are getting a little bit tighter. And when we talk about sustainability, because I can imagine that a lot of people in the audience right now might be in marketing, you might be in something adjacent to sustainability. A lot of people that are communicating about sustainability may be on quite uneven footing and not really sure how to get started. And the main takeaway I want you to have from this, or what I want you to be listening for, is that whatever way that we communicate now is providing a foundation for this new regulatory environment. And we want to start ourselves off on a good foot, making sure we're interrogating all of our own claims and making sure that not only are we not allowing companies to be liable for any reason, that we are approaching sustainability and ESG communications from a standpoint of accountability and transparency and measurability. So let's talk about the real world consequences of greenwashing. I have 3 examples for you today. The first one, we're carbon neutral. You have probably seen this around a lot. And specifically today, I want to talk a little bit about carbon offsets. So I have definitely been seeing in recent years a lot of claims that a product or a company's operations are carbon neutral, or that they have ambitions to be net zero. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to dive into the intricacies of what these things mean, but essentially it would be that your operations, the emissions that you put out, as well as the emissions that you save or reduce, should even out and be neutral. But in reality, that is very challenging because everything that we do is going to cost us emissions. So carbon offsetting became popular in the last, let's say, decade or so, where that is a way to fund projects like, for example, planting trees or attempting to reduce tree loss, perhaps actually helping to invest in a renewable power plant, essentially for a company to not directly reduce its emissions, but to be investing in emissions reductions elsewhere. So why can that be problematic? Because it seems pretty good on the surface, right? Offsetting in practice tends to be a way for companies to divert away from reducing their own emissions. And the gold standard of becoming more sustainable in your business and operations is to start with your own emissions, of course, right? So there's a very big difference in what kind of carbon credits that companies are using, but the lack of regulation means that there can be high quality carbon credits, low quality carbon credits, and that can be very misleading. And what I mean by that is that there are projects that may genuinely, for example, be planting trees, whether right in your country or halfway across the world. But a lot of times these have unforeseen consequences. So last year, I think John Oliver came out with a video. It was very scandalous about how unreliable and untrustworthy some carbon credit markets can be. And out of that came some stories, for example, the fact that some companies were investing in carbon credits in Uganda to plant pine forests. But as a result of that, they were actually displacing the people who lived there. So essentially, the people who were running the project would say, hey, you guys have to leave. We're going to plant some pine forests here. so that we can save emissions. Now, nobody really wins from that. And that also brings up the really important point of when we talk about our ESG efforts and communications, we don't, even though we really care about the environmental part of things, we don't want to neglect the S, which is the social part of things. So your environmental efforts should never disadvantage what you're doing for the people in the communities where you operate. But let's say that a carbon credit does what it says it will do, which is a project to plant trees. Investing in future trees takes a lot of time. It's kind of a gamble on the future because we don't know whether those trees will come to fruition and actually save the carbon that we're talking about. So it is a bit risky, and it also is no guarantee. So you should always be focusing on your emissions first. One last thing I want to say about this is that I worked with a company last year that was doing their initial ESG report. And when they were calculating their emissions, they looked at their suppliers, and some of their suppliers, because they're a software company, were saying um, our um, our data servers are powered by renewable energy, and everything else we offset with carbon projects, and we're carbon neutral. So this company doing their ESG report would say, okay, our suppliers are carbon neutral, so we're carbon neutral too. The thing is, if we can't trust carbon credits, how can we say that somebody is actually carbon neutral? And if another company then relies on that, then the sort of exaggerated and potentially false claims can be stocking up. So essentially, carbon offsets don't always do what they say they do, and we want to be really, really careful about relying on those versus reducing our own emissions. The second ESG horror story I want to focus on is it's recyclable or compostable. I'm sure a lot of people can think of examples of this in their life. Now, many of you may be familiar with the fact that recycling is a difficult topic because actually worldwide only 9% of plastics are recycled. And so a lot of the push towards recycling can be a little bit misguided in the first place. But a lot of companies will say this product is a good choice because it is made of recyclable materials. That could be plastic, wood, aluminum, glass, what have you. But then we've also seen in recent years this push towards bio-based plastics. So for example, plastic bottles might instead be made of cornstarch or sugar cane and things like this. And they will make the claim that they are compostable. Well, if that's saving emissions to sort of make our plastics out of plants instead, what could be bad about that? So again, a lot of recyclability and compostability claims are a lot more about theory than practice. So in the first place, if a lot of people don't recycle, these materials are not going back into the waste stream. And a lot of times companies are not making room for them in the first place. So let's say that we get some reclaimed materials. Well, how do we put them back into production in a useful way? So one of the first steps is, of course, to make recycling available. In practice, a lot of products can be composites. So it might be plastic and paper at the same time. For example, like a coffee cup or something like, a chip bag, which has sort of an aluminum coating on it. It's very difficult to separate these materials. And in reality, something that might say recyclable on it is not. But then we talk about the compostability side of things, whether that is a plastic bottle or a chip bag or a bamboo fork or something like this. So a lot of things will say, or even as you can see here on the slide, a garbage bag. And even though they might say that they are compostable, in reality, a lot of these things are only commercially compostable. So commercially compostable is different than home composting. At home, you could put them on your compost pile, or maybe you have a worm composting bin or something like that. But these materials, they need a lot more concentrated heat and pressure to actually break down. And that would only be available in something like municipal composting, so that you would send it to your township or something like that to compost. So you're buying something because it's making the claim that it's compostable, but it can't actually be composted by you. And then the cumulative effect is you have to throw that in the trash, or maybe you do a little bit of wishful thinking. You try to throw it in your recycling bin. That thing can't actually be recycled, and either it contaminates the waste stream or just goes to waste in the end, right? And none of these things are benefiting either companies, consumers, or the environment. And we can also just quickly note here that despite the fact that big food and beverage companies are making more plant-based bottles and things like that than ever, they're also creating as many plastic bottles than ever, have ramped up that production um, with their growth. So even though we may seem to be diverting these materials, in reality, plastic production is still ramping up. The last example that I'm going to talk about is this word eco-friendly, which we have been seeing for decades. But what does eco-friendly mean? So when I looked this up, because I was curious too, right? What is eco-friendly? It basically just said not harmful to the environment. That could mean a million different things. So does that mean it helps biodiversity? Does it reduce water use? Does it reduce emissions? Is it recyclable, and how can I recycle it? And then at a base level, does this product or service actively help the environment, or does it just avoid harm? So what does eco-friendly really mean? The thing about eco-friendly is that it is one of the major terms that's going to be banned under the EU Green Claims Directive, essentially because it is so vague and hard to define. And we can already see this in practice. So whether it's a class action lawsuit or whether it is, for example, a governmental lawsuit, we can see that companies, big gas and oil names like Exxon, Shell, and BP, as well as other big companies like Walmart, H&M, Nike, and Oatly, have already faced legal challenges specifically because they've used claims like eco-friendly without backing it up with proof. And then there's even this longer line that companies might say they're committed to protecting the environment, have gotten them in hot water because people will ask, well, how can you prove it? And if you don't back that up, then what is the value in a statement like that? So now here we come to these scary greenwashing terms. There are more here than I have time to discuss, but we've touched on a lot of them already. So things like eco-friendly, natural, clean or non-toxic, even energy efficient. Green, of course, is very vague, committed to protecting the environment. These are all terms that are going to be under increased scrutiny with the EU Green Claims Directive, as well as the verifying of ESG reports in the future. And the main point that I want to make here is not necessarily that we have to get rid of all of these terms, although some of them should go the way of the dodo, things like eco-friendly or natural that don't really have a super strong definition behind them in the first place. But you shouldn't use these terms unless you can prove it. And that's really the name of the game here. That's what makes companies benefit when they can stand behind their claims and gain a more loyal audience. It's important for all of these consumers that are really concerned about the sustainability of their product, of what they're buying. And it will hopefully ultimately reduce the pressure on our natural world. So here are a few takeaways from my presentation. First of all, what goes around comes around. The way you communicate matters, and you can choose to mislead or illuminate with your communications. Second of all, don't be a lazy bones, avoid wishful thinking. I was having a lot of fun with the puns, so I hope that that lands for you as well. So most importantly here, in the future, we don't want to just say that something is green. I would love to encourage you to say what you mean. What is green? Interrogate that for yourself. If you're worried consumers won't understand things like that we've reduced our water use by 50% in this product, or other things like it is compostable under these conditions, it's your job to educate your consumers. Try to make your ESG claims as clear and accessible as possible. And a lot of times it can be very useful to pursue third-party labels. Like you can see here on this compostable bag, it's sort of verified for home composting. And then you can see another example on the left here, this declare label. That's kind of a nutrition label for products, which is showing their origin, their ingredients, and some of their safety statistics. And then just a bonus tip here, if you want your products to be recycled, it's really important for you to help create that market opening. Don't put the burden on consumers. If you mean for your products to be recycled or composted, work with your commercial partners and your government partners to make that possible. Educate your consumers on how they can do that. And of course, try to close the loop by even taking back those materials and reincorporating them into your own production. Finally, give them pumpkin to talk about. If you want to make an ESG claim, you should ask how until you get to that central nugget. So what I mean by that is, let's say this product is non-toxic. How? Well, it doesn't contain chemicals of concern. Okay, what kind of chemicals of concern? We want to be as specific as possible in our communications for the benefit of our consumers, to educate and inform them, and to create more loyal audiences, because we're really standing behind the things that we say. Of course, if something that you claim is true, don't use it. I know that this is a big shift that we're in now, but again, not only can you lose people in your audience, you may also be liable to regulations. And finally, if there's one thing you take away, always form your marketing claims around proof. We see more and more that people are wanting to align themselves with brands that really live their values. It can be very difficult for consumers to understand which brands those are. And the purpose of something like an anti-greenwashing criteria is helping bring us all a little bit closer together in our understanding of what sustainability is, again, with the ultimate goal of trying to make a healthier planet for future generations. I want to thank you very much for listening to this talk today. You can find me on LinkedIn under Chloe Skye. You can see it right here on the screen. I would absolutely love for you to reach out to me. Please send me a connection message if you're interested, and I'd love to chat with you about where you are in your sustainability journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was so insightful and so valuable, and I've made notes throughout the session, and I know you have to run at the very end of the session, so I just want to ask you one question before we let you go. I know you've worked with more than 100 different companies on communicating sustainability, writing ESG reports. If you would need to explain, how do we get to that point where we end up greenwashing customers? Maybe you have some examples from your professional life, maybe just like a general direction, because this why is a question that doesn't allow me to sleep at night sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that maybe some people have heard this phrase like that it's useful to have a triple bottom line that would be people, planet, and profit. For a really long time, companies have been focusing a lot on profit. That is why businesses exist naturally. And it almost seems like becoming more sustainable is this something that we've been tacking on, let's say, since the 1970s, when the environmental movement really kicked off. And I think that it feels that way for a lot of companies as well. A lot of people will found a business, kind of go about their operations, get a loyal customer base, and then they say, okay, and now a lot of people are becoming concerned about my sustainability specs, right? How do I kind of change the game? And this often leads to greenwashing because, on the one hand, the people who are internal, they don't necessarily understand their impact on the environment or their communities. We don't want to forget like the S part of ESG, so there are social elements as well. But also, it might push people to make claims that they can't really back up. I've also encountered that in my work, where now it feels, especially for large companies, for sustainability to be at the heart of operations. And a lot of people will say things like sustainability is in our DNA, but they've really only started communicating about it recently, right? So I think this pressure to kind of act fast is really pushing people to make claims that they can't back up. But I really, as I hope it came out in the presentation, that I don't think that this benefits anyone, because people will find out that you are at the very, let's to give an idealistic view, bending the truth, right? And in some cases outright lying. And I don't think that that's, it doesn't benefit anybody's kind of positive view for the future or for their own business. So I hope that answered the question. Thanks for having me, Kristine.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining and sharing the insightful tips and tricks and the horror stories. Thank you. I'm going to let you go. If no questions from you, then I'll just ask all of my questions to the next speaker, Juozas Baranauskas.
Hello.
He's going to be presenting about packaging, and I'm removing myself from the virtual stage and wishing best of luck. Go for it.
Hello, everybody. Really interesting presentation by Chloe. We're gonna touch some of the same subjects, but I'm gonna approach them from a different perspective. I'm gonna teach you how to greenwash because it's horror stories, and maybe some of you are interested not into like normal sustainability development, but you just want to greenwash without being really sustainable. And of course, for those who want to be more sustainable, I'm gonna share some tips about how to create and how to brag about these things as well. Because as Chloe said, to brag about sustainable achievement is not that bad. It's a thing of businesses, and all of us want to do that. I work with both brands and design agencies, and I help them to develop packaging strategies, develop unboxing experiences, all of those things. And we test different materials, like check how they recycle, what's the different CO2 footprint, and all of these things. And sometimes in the end, we see that we achieved really great results, and then we think, how can we communicate these things? And then we are on that line when we think whether we are greenwashing or we are communicating the true things and we educating. So today we're going to talk about that. So for a short intro, what I want to tell you, how I see many packaging communication items today, is that they could go into two separate groups. One of them is like a silence about sustainability. We see no claims, no certificates, even in those countries in Europe where it's still legal to not communicate what kind of material it is. So as you know, like a small number, for example, plastic number 5, for example. So in some countries it's legal not to show that, and some brands do not communicate those things. They do not communicate how to sort their packaging. So this is one type of packaging communication. And another one is those brands who are just shouting about everything. They're making a lot of big claims. They're communicating a lot of different symbols and certificates. Some of them are real, some of them are from their own imagination. And for consumers nowadays, it's really frustrating because sometimes too much communication, or in this case, in greenwashing, could be really bad as well. So, the first tip how to greenwash is to claim something about being environmentally friendly or other vague concepts. So, as Chloe already told you, just being environmentally friendly doesn't mean anything. But if you want to do that today, still, we don't have EU Green Claims Initiative, so you can do that. You can just say, we are concerning about the environment, we're doing a lot, blah, 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 and that's it. The more abstract you are, it's even harder for your consumers to check whether you are lying or not, because you're not saying anything specific. And yeah, so this is just example about that, where this bag is made from recycled and new materials. So the open question would be, if you use 5% of recycled materials and 95% of new materials, can you say that? Or should you say that we are using 5 recycled materials and 95% of new materials? And if you want to be good and create sustainably and communicate good things, how should you do that? So I would suggest to allocate 1/5 of your content or your claims about like bragging, marketing, and saying, okay, we green, we care about nature. And then 4/5 about communicating what you're doing, why you're doing that. You can do also that in the just put QR codes, or say that more information could be found on your website, because as we know, the packaging is small, and a lot of design agencies are complaining that we cannot put everything on packaging, and that's true. But all the time you have an option just to communicate those things online in your own sustainability reports and so on. So you can brag about it, but you need to prove it and talk about it and communicate those things for your consumers. Another really popular, a really funny actually thing, how can you greenwash your consumers, is to use a lot of green symbols. I just googled these things and I found 38, 34, almost 34,000 different icons created, actually meaning nothing. It's not official certifications, but they're created and it's there on the internet, and different brands are using those and creating their own. And this is how they're communicating that they're green and their packaging is green. So this is another strategy, and a lot of brands they're using that. And how you should do that if you want to do it in a good way, first, you need to use official certificates. If, for example, using FSC materials, then there's like official numbers for that and codes and organizations who can provide it to you. And of course, sometimes when you create something new and something really interesting, you want to brag about it and you want to create some new, your own materials, some new symbols, and so on. So then my advice would be, if you do that, those things cannot be mixed up and they cannot look identical or similar to the official certificates. And then if you do that, it's not that bad. And of course, not to forget the last point, uh, sometimes you can even find the packaging which uses a lot of green symbols, a lot of leaves and like green hearts and so on, but they do not communicate how to sort this packaging, whether it's like recyclable and what it's made of. So if you do these things, do not forget the most important part, to clearly state what kind of material it is, how to sort it, and how to prepare it before sorting it. The third tip would be to use brown color. It's really popular nowadays as well. I even found like glass bottle which was which had a paper print on it, and it looked like a paper bottle, and of course inside you have glass. So paper trend is really big trend. Today we're not going to talk about which material is better and why, but yeah, if you want to greenwash your consumers, just no matter what you use, for example, plastic packaging, multi-layer plastic packaging, just put brown color on top of it. If it looks like it's recycled paper, with some dirty particles in it, it's even better. And for other elements, graphical elements, also use other sustainable colors, which is green, blue, and so on. And yeah, so this is how you greenwash. And yeah, some examples that even like bag of chips, which is multi-layer plastic material with aluminum inside, they trying to look natural colors and so on. And if you want to do that in a good way, show genuine material. So that means if you use plastic, it should look like plastic. It's nothing bad about it, because in some cases plastic is the best packaging material. In some cases, it's paper. In some cases, it's glass or metal. And yeah, if you use cardboard, then show it. If it's plastic, do not cover it, because most of the consumers still they're gonna realize that you're just greenwashing. And by not hiding materials, you're gonna be even like more sustainable in the end, because you're gonna improve the likelihood that the packaging is gonna be recycled in the end. Because when you combine different materials, for example plastic and paper, for the recycling facilities is super hard or usually impossible to recycle them in the end. The fourth thing is to brag about your new ear pleasing materials. The Chloe touched this subject as well, talking about like new compostable materials and so on. I guess you heard about them quite oftenly. Some of them look like plastic, some of them look like paper for the end consumer. And yeah, so are they bad nowadays? Some of them are, some of them not. As I said, today we're not talking about whether some of the materials are good or not. In some cases, and especially in the future when in Europe we're gonna have separate collection of green waste. So when it's gonna be, with the food and the packaging is gonna be really compostable, maybe those items will be really beneficial to the system. But now most of those items could, just when we have plastic sorting system, it could interact with them, and that's not good, because that's not real plastic. And in some cases with the paper as well. So the question for you is whether those things is really more sustainable in the end, because for the end consumers it's really air pleasing. We see a lot of brands saying, we're 100% compostable, we are made from plants, and so on and so on. So if you want to greenwash, you can do that. But my tips would be, if you really know that your really innovative material truly rocks, then you need to prove it, then you need to speak about it, how to sort it, what to do with it in the end. And yeah, and just to prove all the things and ask for all the certificates from your packaging manufacturers and packaging providers. Because one example, I saw one European cosmetics brand, and they're using plastic bottles, and they changed their current normal plastic bottles into plant-made plastic bottles, and they're sourcing them from South America. So the first question is, of course, as I said, whether they're really recyclable. But and this is the question where you need to, do some research. But another question is quite, simple: is it really sustainable to brought some material from South America to Europe, and like how big is the CO2 and all of those other things? Yeah, so when you focus only on one thing, it's really simple to look sustainable. But in the end, the customer's gonna find out. And as Chloe said, with the new initiatives and new legislations, it's gonna be even harder to greenwash in this way. The fifth strategy is to show off your primary packaging but stay silent on the rest. Uh, so yeah, so how you should do that in this way: you have your primary packaging, which is in the shelf in the shop, and it should be as light as possible. You should use it like the least amount of materials possible, and just brag about it and say, oh, we are using we made our packaging like 60% lighter, and so on and so on. But what people actually don't see, they don't see the, secondary packages, the packagings of the logistics, all the extra materials which needs to be, used to make your packaging and your product safe in the logistics system. Because as you know, the primary thing of the packaging, why it was, invented in the first place, to ship products and make them safe. So yeah, so if you're using too much packaging in your logistics system, that's not a good thing. So how you should approach this: you should embrace the full scope of your packaging system, analyze everything. Maybe in some cases it's not going to be so nice for the consumers when they see that you do not, improve your primary packaging. But if you really know how to communicate those things with your consumers, you can brag about other things as well. You can say, this year for the secondary packaging, or the like for the packaging in logistics, we used, 1/3 less plastic. You never saw that part, but we did that. So this is how you should approach these things: not only improve the things that customer sees in the shop, but to improve all the logistics chain. The sixth tip how to greenwash would be to highlight one feature and overlook the bigger picture. So you can use any of these slogans, like our packaging is infinitely recyclable, lower CO2, packaging made from renewable resources, recycled packaging, and so on and so on. Because as I say that any kind of material and any kind of solution could sound the best if we want that. For example, we can say that glass and metal is infinitely recyclable, and do not mention how many energy it needs to be, how much energy it needs to be used to do that. We can say that our paper or cardboard packaging is from renewable resources, because that's true. And we can say that our plastic packaging uses less CO2 than other types of packaging, because that is also true. So yeah, if you look really in the narrow perspective, it's really easy to brag about these things, and you can do that. But actually, how you should approach that, to provide facts in the context. You should say that, for this type of product, we're using paper because it's recyclable, blah 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 blah, and we can do that because we don't need extra protective properties for our product, but it uses more energy if we comparing with our plastic packaging in another category. And the plastic packaging maybe cannot be recycled in many places, but we need that packaging for another reasons. So you need to provide all the facts in the broader context. The seventh tip is also Chloe touched it, and it's about CO2. So do not specify current CO2 levels, how much you're using. Just talk about reduction and compensation. Use any amount of materials and actually do whatever you want as long as you compensate. Do not provide any compensation certificates, and of course compensate with unrelated programs, and just blend everything so much that consumer thinks that the whole product is compensated, or the entire company operation is compensated. Because as well, with the new Europe Green Claims Directive, uh, they're gonna touch the subject, because in some cases some companies are compensating packaging, and for example they're writing that uh, compensated in the big letters, packaging in small letters, and consumer can think that the whole thing, the whole product inside, the whole item is compensated. That's gonna end, but still you can do that now. So how to create and how to brag, and in this case, how to approach to compensation. And yeah, so explain why you're doing that. In the first place, explain how much CO2 your packaging is using. And if you want to compensate it, you can easily do that. And of course, then I would suggest to compensate with related programs. What I call related programs. That means if you're operating in one country in Europe and you compensate in another side of the world with some unrelated thing, which is unrelated to your industry, it could be, it's not could be only greenwashing, because sometimes it's really hard to prove, as Chloe said, that that thing works. But also that means that you just doesn't care, and you not invested in the things, and you're not following the industry. If you're working in one specific field with the forestry, then you could compensate in the forestry field. But if you're working in quite another area, then why to compensate in the forestry field? You could look for other programs, because there's many of them. The eighth thing, it would be create one sustainably solution and ignore all others. And this presentation, the whole presentation, could be used not only for the packaging things, but also for other industries. If you don't have any packaging solutions but still want to greenwash, so in this case, I guess many fast clothing companies are using that. They're creating one really sustainable fast fashion, not fast fashion. They're creating really sustainable collection, and then they're creating 50 more fast fashion collections. But what they do, they only advertise the one sustainable one. So yeah, so this is another strategy when some brands are creating packaging which is really sustainable and really nice, but this is only one packaging and it's a big corporation we're talking about, and then only marketing the one sustainable solution. So how you should approach that, of course, if you created one sustainable solution and it's new for you, and you know that your other items are not so sustainable, that's good because you're improving into the right direction. But you can talk about it, you can say that we did this and this is the job which is left to be done. And then you can, yeah, just speak about your plan, say that these items is going to be improved in the next 3 years, or maybe even be honest and say that these types of, multi-layer plastic solutions are not going to be improved in like foreseen future, next 5 years, because we don't know how to do that. And maybe we're going to, work with the industry and so on, and gonna think how we can do that, but we don't know how to do it yet, but just do not say that your whole brand is sustainable just because you improved one particular packaging thing. And the last but not least, as Chloe said, true sustainability, it's not only about, environmental things, but about other things as well. And also what you can do when trying to be really sustainable, not because you want to greenwash, but because you just looking for better alternatives in packaging to be more like recycled and recyclable and so on. uh, you can do more harm than good. You need to look how much, about the wages, where it's being made, what kind of companies you're working with. So the last step, the ninth one, would be look beyond recyclability, CO2, and all other aspects we discussed today, and discuss and work with people in companies and look deeper, look about people, how they're treating people, and on other things, small things. Yeah. So that's would be it. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Juozas. This was really, really insightful. I'm gonna add also Chloe to the stage because first and foremost, I want to invite the audience to share in the chat on the LinkedIn where you're watching it now. Currently, there is also a chat, and it would be amazing to hear what did you learn today, what did you find useful. These virtual events sometimes are really one-sided, and we would really like to hear from you, and also test that the chat actually works, because this is first time I'm using the platform. So if you learned anything today, please share in the chat. If you don't want to share in the chat, just message Juozas or Chloe and let them know what you learned from them today. I think that would be an amazing thank you for them as well. There is a question from Zane Skye. Thank you, Zane. How do you see what would actually motivate companies to be more honest and actually make genuine efforts in being sustainable? I would think that the regulation must come from government and with financial incentives. What's your outlook on this? And as you have worked with many companies, thank you, Zane. Juozas, do you have anything you could add on this?
Yeah, the customers can motivate when they're buying things. Of course, they're voting with their wallets, but also we need to have that in mind. We hear that customers would like to spend more money on sustainable products, but the actual data, when they're asking customers, would you like to spend more money, they saying, most of them saying yes, but when they're actually paying their own money, the data is lower. So the price is not, if you are having sustainable product, it cannot be very more expensive than the usual ones. Then the brands can do that as well. And if you have 10 brands and one of those, for example, when we working with our clients, we know that we're not only impacting that one brand, but we impacting 10 other brands, because they're gonna look to the brand we worked with, and they're gonna think, okay, if they made these sustainable choices, then we need to follow them as well. And to end this, of course, me honestly, I think that legislations are the most important thing, because in the end, some brands and some customers, they don't want to change, and then we need to have good legislators to change things. So as I say, we need to vote, right? When we can vote, for the for the right people, and they can change things.
I'll just piggyback on Juozas. I definitely agree with everything that you said, and I want to add another dimension to it as well, which is that the reason why the legislation is coming from the governmental side and that we will have more regulation is because we need it, right? Because a lot of companies will not make the move unless they're pushed, and I know that people have varying opinions on that and whether that's fair and all of the things, and we want people to choose the right thing, but in reality the pursuit of profits can be very attractive, right? And as I was talking about before, it pushes people to say things that may not actually be true. But I also want to just add the element of it that if we have taken any lesson from the last few years, for example, with the pandemic and stuff like that, and with the disruption of supply chains, more and more company and for example, extreme weather events, more and more companies are becoming aware that climate change is real. Things are happening that the landscape is changing, and that they need to do something different, if only to protect their business interests. So what I'm saying is that a lot of people will look at their supply chain and say, okay, in order for us to make sure that this exists for the future, that we can continue producing and selling and all of those things, we need to act to ensure, for example, that we can grow these crops, that this material will be available and things like that. And I mean, at this point, I've heard a lot of people say that whatever brings people to the table is important, even if it's not like we wish that people would be altruistic and moral and all the things, but it doesn't have to be that. Whatever we can do to make sure that companies are acting genuinely, genuinely being the key word, is really important at this point. I can see one more question.
Thank you,
as well.
Chloe. Yeah, I see there is question from Evelina, which is a really, really good one. Essentially, the question is like, how can a company that doesn't have a lot of resources, for example, a startup, evaluate the CO2 they have and the CO2 of their company and their network, their business partners? How can they compare if they have used non-sustainable materials, and then how much should they compensate? This is like, I am very well aware of the time. So Juozas, please.
No, it's a question for you. I wanted to say that I think so. This is the perfect question for you, Kristine. No?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I actually already had a kind of answer in the back of my mind here, because essentially you have to look at the impact that you have. What is the product that you're bringing into the world, and what is the positive impact that you create? And if at this stage you have to have the perfect packaging or all the perfect suppliers, and you have to also look at the company's mission. If there is something that just to make sure that you're building something that aligns with your values and that supports the kind of a business you actually want to create in the future. The calculation process usually involves a life cycle assessment consultant, and it usually is a process that costs 5 to 10 to 15,000 euros. So yeah, you have to be ready to invest in that kind of a knowledge. We're literally out of time. So thank you everyone who joined us live. Thank you for asking questions, for sharing what you've learned. Juozas, Chloe, thank you so much for sharing the work you do, the knowledge you've gathered through many, many projects. Please, let's connect on LinkedIn, support each other on this journey. I believe collaboration is the key to making the positive change that we want to see in the world. So let's make it happen. Have a good rest of the day and a great week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.